Peace be upon you. Assalamu alaikum. And this is our last recording for the first subject. What is Tazkeyah and its importance? So in the previous recordings, I talked about the purpose of life and the nature of humans in the Islamic paradigm. And this is very important because we're going to bring that up again here when we talk about Tazkeyah. Now, the first point that I want to establish here is I want to go to the Quran and just choose a couple of places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned Tazkiyah. Of course, there's a lot of places in the Quran, but I'm just picking two of them. So in chapter 91, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about the self and how He molded it and how He inspired it. Inspired it with the ability to do both good and bad. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the one who is successful basically is the one who cleanses and purifies this nafs. And the ones who fail are the ones who basically don't purify it and corrupt it. Now, you will find some books talking about purification of the self or purification of the soul. Basically, it's the same subject. Just some people refer to it this way or that way. So from these verses, we can see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about Tazkiyah and that it is important because it has to do with success if one purifies it. Another spot is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about sending the messenger with the purpose of course, delivering the signs and the verses to us and to cleanse us, to purify us. So this is tied to the Islamic tradition, the purpose of cleansing and purifying the self. So after establishing its place in the Quran, now I would like to move on to explain what is Tazkiyah and how it's related to when we talked about the purpose of life. So first of all, Tazkiyah comes from the same root word as zakah, which means to grow and also means to purify. Now, so what are we growing and purifying here? This is the purpose of life. We said that the goal is ubudiyah. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us for this purpose, to know God and to enter into this relationship based on love and humility with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because of that, we follow basically what He asked us to do, whether it's stewardship, whether it's how we deal with other humans, with the rest of creation. We follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us. Why? Because this is related to the nature of humans. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with that complexity. There's the human physical dimension, and then we have the nafs, the qalb, the mind, the soul, and so on. And so He created us with this complexity. He is the only one who knows the interaction between these different elements and how they affect one another, how these elements are affected by life and the environment, how it's affected by other people. And so He prescribed the remedy or the path how to reach Him and achieve the purpose of creation. By, for example, what everybody knows, doing the salah, the fasting, the pilgrimage, and so on, and then not doing what is haram and doing what is halal, and so on. So all of these, all the do's and don'ts and how you do it and so on, it is based on His knowledge of what we who are complex human beings, how we can achieve that purpose. So some people might say, well, I'm just, people just need to pray, fast, do this, don't do the haram, do the halal, and that's it. It is true, that's it. But let's look, for example, at salah. why do you find people, for example, that pray once in every blue moon, for example? There are others who might pray all the 5 prayers at the end of the day. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where people are basically praying like what the Prophet, peace be upon him, used to pray. They will pray on time, they will pray even extra prayers, they will pray jama'ah, they will pray at the mosque, they will, all of these kind of prayers. And the same thing goes for fasting, the same goes for the halal and the haram and all of that. So why are we at different levels in practicing our ubudiyah? And this is a fact. Nobody can deny it. We are at different levels. We struggle. Every one of us has his own struggle in ascending in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's keep that in mind, that we are at different levels, even in what people consider this is it, the salah, the prayer, all of that. So that's one thing. Put it on the side, and let's now look at another point, and then I will connect them together. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that genuine prayers should deter one from indecency and wickedness. Okay, so the wisdom, or one of the wisdoms behind prayers, is that it has to change me, to transform my heart in order that it will deter me from indecency and wickedness. Okay, so connecting now the 2 points. The first point is there are levels in our practice. Why are there levels in our practice? The second point here, that there is a dimension, an inner dimension that should accompany the prayers. So the prayers, it has an external component, which is, okay, you stand, you bow, you prostrate, you read the Quran, and so on. But in order to deter us from indecency and wickedness, that external appearance or practice of the prayer has to be accompanied with an inner transformation. And this is what the ayah is saying. And so this is why we are at different levels in our ascension of ubudiyah, because what is accompanying each one of us in their heart is different than the other person. So the more we work on the inner selves, the inner part of ourselves, when we are praying, the more it will be a genuine prayer, the more it will transform us, and it will also transform our behavior. So this is why we also are at different levels. So from this, now we established that there's an external part to ubudiyah, or to the acts of ubudiyah, and there's an internal part. The level of the internal parts affects what the practice of the external part, and vice versa. Let's look at another example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about righteous people. And this is in chapter 3. He's saying, he's describing those righteous people are the ones who basically spend even in the time when they're not rich. If they're rich or they're not rich, they still spend and give others. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is moving to, they are the ones who control their anger. Okay, controlling the anger is an external act. So I'm still angry. Okay, my insides, I'm still angry, I'm still upset, but I'm controlling my external. I'm controlling my anger, so my behavior is not reflecting the anger. Now moving on, and those who pardon others. pardon, forgiveness, is an inner quality. It's in the heart. So if we look here, we're talking about two things. We're looking at this external behavior. So first I control that anger, and then I move on. Another level is I start to pardon these people. Forgiveness. And of course, when I forgive others, I don't need to control my anger anymore, because there is no anger. So this is also showing that there are different dimensions to the action. There's an external dimension, and then there is an internal dimension, even to interacting with people, not just the prayers. So let's combine this and look at it and see where Tazkeyah fits. So you've seen this from the last recording. This is our spiritual anatomy. We are made from physical form, and then there is a metaphysical dimension to ourselves. Now let's use this image, but look at it in a different way. This is an iceberg. This analogy, a lot of scholars use that. Why? Because the upper part is basically above seawater, is the part that is observable to others, to everybody. Everybody sees that part, but it is carried and dependent on a part that is submerged, that is underwater. Basically, people don't see it. So the submerged part has its effect, of course, it's holding the upper part, but people don't understand or don't know what's the hidden part. Now take that image that we talked about and let's put it here. So the physical part of ourselves is basically what everybody sees, and that is the outer part of ourselves, and that is the external practice. I'm standing there, I'm bowing, I'm prostrating, I am reading, there's certain ways of doing things. It has to be accompanied by a level of connectedness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the level of the ruh, the qalb, the nafs. Remember, we talked about the heart. There are different types of hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, there's the sick heart, there's the sound heart. The nafs, you have the serene nafs. Now imagine what kind of prayer is a person is going to perform when he has or she has the serene nafs and the sound heart. That is going to be similar to the prophetic practice of prayers. And then when we have a sick heart, a dead heart probably will not even pray. Let's say a sick heart, and we have, for example, the reprimanding nafs, and then they keep fluctuating. And so our performance in the prayer also keeps fluctuating. And so the inner and the outer are deeply connected and affect one another. As we saw in the prayer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that this prayer should deter us from wrong actions. And so the outer affects the inner affects the outer. And this is where we do the purifying and the growing. Basically, that heart, that nafs, we need to grow and we need to purify. We need to work on the inner dimension to ourselves in order to perfect also the outer behavioral dimensions. And the more we work on the inner, the more the outer is perfected, and the more the outer is perfected, the more the inner is perfected. They both act and affect one another. So let's look how we do that. So let's look now at what is it that we are purifying and what is it that we are growing. Now, as Muslims know that Muslims, everybody, all humans, were created with a clean slate. There is no original sin. So we are born with this pure nature, with this tendency to do good. We can choose to do good. We have a lot of goodness in ourselves. We have that inner preparedness for connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we need to grow this. And we need to take care of this purity that we started with, because as we grow and we practice our right to choose right and wrong, and affected by the environment and how we grew up and all of that, and we choose sometimes to do wrong things, and it affects the status of our hearts. And we're going to talk about this in later recordings. And so what we need to do is we need to purify ourselves continuously from these attachments or shackles that shackle our hearts. Now, the other point is we are created from, as I said, a physical dimension and a metaphysical dimension. The physical body that we have, and I talked about this before, we have certain desires, certain needs. We need to eat, we need to rest, we need to procreate, we need to, we have certain desires. God put these desires in us. God created us this way. He created us with different emotions. We can feel anger, we can feel jealousy, we can feel fear, all of these different kinds of feelings. He created this for a reason. So in the Islamic paradigm, we don't look at these qualities as negative, or the body as negative, the physical dimensions. No, because this is how God created us. So what we want to cleanse ourselves from is, for example, let's go back to the verse that talked about the ones who control their anger and forgive people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about anger, but He's not saying anger is bad. Okay, so anger is needed. God created it for a certain reason. In order, for example, to defend ourselves, in order to remove injustice, we need to get angry. It pushes us to do something. Okay, so the emotion itself is not bad. It's a creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But how we use it and channel it, that is to do with the purification of the self. If I channel it in the way that makes me ascend in my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it is Tazkeyah. It is helping me establish the purpose of life. How do I do that? I do that by establishing ubudiyah. Ubudiyah means I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I get to know Him, and then it translates after that in getting to love Him. And so when I get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I know the 99 names and qualities. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not act out of wrath. I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy. I know His generosity. I know all of these. I know them, and I start to practice the shades that I have, the shades of these names in myself. I start to purify myself by controlling these qualities and using them in the way that reflects shades of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names. I mean, what is more beautiful than that? This is how I connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I transform my inner self so that I know myself, and then I know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, that will lead totally to loving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that humility, by realizing His perfection and my imperfection. So purity is by cleansing one, not from negative qualities, but from how you use these qualities in order to reflect the shades of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names and qualities. And so that is how Tazkeyah helps us achieve the purpose of life. And the more I share or be able to live a shade of Allah subhanahu's mercy, the more it's going to be reflected in my stewardship, in my forgiveness of others, in how I deal with the environment, and all of that. So Tazkeyah is working on that inner dimension of myself, growing it in the way that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So some people might say, well, basically, I don't need to be, I don't need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be good. I can be good. There's lots of people who are good, who work on their anger, who meditate and, try not to hurt others and, be good people. It's true. Definitely. But we don't just look at that. We have to look at it from the worldview. That person who is doing that, he's doing that according to a certain worldview that he sees himself in. In the Islamic worldview, it all revolves around God. He created us. I am going back to Him. This life is a middle ground for transforming myself to be ready when I meet God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the next life. The way I change myself is according to what pleases Him, because this is how I prepare myself for what is waiting for me in the next life. It is not just to be a nice person and not to hurt others. This is a ramification of it, that I will become a nice person and I don't hurt others and so on. But I'm not doing it for that purpose. I am doing it because I love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a different paradigm of looking at things. So I hope this was clear, talking about Tazkeyah and what it is, how we work on the inner part of ourselves, and the importance of it, and how it helps us in achieving the purpose of life. So thank you very much, and I hope you will join me in the next recording, which is going to be more on the spiritual anatomy of the self and the heart. God bless and take care.